Hey, good Wednesday, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully, we're having an all right middle of the week out there, and it is time. Basically, we are here the final day, or really kind of the day of potential landfall here with major Hurricane Milton, unfortunately, right into a very populated area of the west coast of Florida. And unfortunately, things haven't really changed in the forecast. Still expecting major surge impacts, major wind impacts, and major rainfall impacts through really much of the Sunshine State. The one kind of good piece here is basically, 24 to 36 hours from now, we will be done and we will be kind of in the cleanup process. So, luckily, not too much longer to go talking about the storm and dealing with the storm, and then we can finally get to the cleanup after that. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Gerald. I'm a meteorology major at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And again, I'm going to give you an update here on everything that we're seeing in the weather department here, especially with Milton, but we'll also talk elsewhere in the country with the potential of a big-time cool down in about a week that could bring the first snow of the year for some folks. And we will definitely break that down. Now, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Like the video, comment, let me know where you're watching from. And if you have family or friends here on the Gulf Coast of Florida, specifically Tampa points south through the Fort Myers and Bonita Springs area, please consider sharing it with them. And even inland through the Orlando and Ocala and Daytona Beach area, also going to see impacts. So again, just consider sharing the video with somebody that you think might find use in it. All right, let's go ahead and dive into things here and start talking about what is, again, major Hurricane Milton, and will likely remain that up to landfall. Now, current satellite loop, you'll notice here, definitely a healthy-looking storm. Now, it's a little less impressive looking than yesterday. The storm has become just slightly more ragged in nature, but again, still a very powerful storm. You'll kind of notice here that this side of the storm is getting eroded just a little bit as that dry air finally catches up to the storm system here, and that's kind of what we're seeing. But still, we have this big area of very intense convection around the center of the storm, and all of that kind of stuff in front of the storm is now beginning to work through the state of Florida, and because of that, our tornado threat is very much increasing. But again, just the main thing to take away from this, still a very powerful hurricane on a final approach to the state of Florida. All right, latest from National Hurricane Center. We're only going to be talking about Milton today, not because that's the only system to talk about, but it's really the only one that is posing a threat to land. We do have an area to watch here just outside of Bermuda. That could bring some shower and storm activity to Bermuda, but other than that, not really much of a tropical system. In fact, that's probably going to become post-tropical or extra-tropical here relatively soon. Hurricane Leslie, again, kind of just spinning away in the Atlantic and will likely fizzle out over the next couple of days, and then an area to watch behind that with only a 10% chance of development out near the Cabo Verde Islands. So again, that one way out into no man's land and not really anybody's problem. All right, latest track from the National Hurricane Center, folks. They have bumped up landfall forecast intensity from 125 mile an hour Category 3 storm now to a major Category 4 storm with 130 mile an hour sustained winds. Also, our track has gotten smaller here as we've gotten closer. So latest track, and this is going to be very important. Obviously, with every storm, it's important where the center of the storm goes. But especially for Milton, just because of how populated this area of the west coast of Florida is, what major population centers get the worst of the storm, it's really going to depend big time on the exact track. Now, the latest center of the cone brings the center of this basically right between Bradenton and Sarasota here on the south side of Tampa through these southern suburbs. And this would be, well, let me rephrase that. Whenever I say this would be a best case scenario for one person, unfortunately, it's going to be someone else's worst case scenario. That's just the nature of these storms. Somebody's going to get major surge and somebody's going to get major offshore flow. And that's just how hurricanes work. The good news for Tampa Bay, if the storm takes the center of this track, is you would be on the northern side. So again, if I'm a big low pressure system here, and I'll just draw some isobars around it, we're going to get very strong onshore flow here on the southern side. So on the center of this track, that would bring the worst of the surge from Sarasota down to Northport and even into Port Charlotte, and kind of up and down the coast there into the Venice area and the Inglewood area. Now, if we get a track further north, let's say we're on the northern side of this cone, then we're going to be getting the worst of the surge right into Tampa Bay, which would bring catastrophic record-breaking surge to a major population center, which obviously we don't want to see. But either way, somebody's going to get major surge. It's a matter of who, and that track will also tell us who gets the worst of the wind, and we'll talk about that a bit as well. Now, the good news is, again, landfall probably about 2 a.m. overnight tonight into tomorrow. This will be back off the coast by 2 p.m. the next day. So, by Thursday evening, this thing will be pulling out to sea and speeding up as well before eventually working out into the Atlantic and becoming post-tropical relatively quickly. So, again, just kind of got to get through today and tomorrow before things really improve here throughout the state of Florida. All right, watches, warnings, advisories. Yeah, it's a full map here through really the entire state. Tropical storm warnings on the I-10 corridor from Jacksonville back over towards the Greenville, Florida area. Same story for Gainesville. Also tropical storm warnings through the southern tier of the state from Lake Okeechobee southward through Miami-Dade, Coral Springs into the Keys. Hurricane warnings in effect, though, from Cape Coral, Bonita Springs, all the way up north through Tampa and even into the northern Tampa suburbs here. And then even inland through the I-4 corridor, seeing these hurricane warnings in effect from Orlando up towards Ocala, even the Daytona Beach area under hurricane warnings. Obviously due to those impacts that we are expecting is why we have those watches and warnings in effect. All right, another thing to share here, radar imagery. The storm is now finally in range of radar, and you can see it's beginning to work on in. A big shield of rain here to the north of the storm, and this was expected. Let me pick a color and see, sorry. This was expected to happen. We are seeing the storm expand in size as well. So you'll notice that rain basically now extending all the way up towards the Jacksonville area while the storm is still off the coastline, due west here of the Naples area. So again, becoming a larger storm, and unfortunately, that's only going to increase the storm surge. Again, the bigger the storm, the bigger the surge, generally speaking, at least on a wider scale. Small storms can also, have big time surge just on a more localized scale compared to a larger one. Another thing I want to note here is we are expecting what could potentially be a tornado outbreak today. And I'll pause it right here to show you why. Look at these feeder bands that are, let me draw this a little bit better. Look at these feeder bands that are kind of into the Gulf of Mexico right now and rotating inland. I mean, and even down here in South Florida, these are impressive little supercells going over the state of Florida. And that really, again, could pose a tornado outbreak risk before the storm makes landfall throughout today and even into tomorrow. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has issued a rare hatched 10% area for tornadoes today. And this is very uncommon to see with tropical systems. Normally we're in that green to brown color. They've added the yellow color today. And more importantly, or not more importantly maybe, but just as importantly, is they've added this little shaded area for you folks into Fort Myers and even inland, from Fort Myers. What that tells us is that the Storm Prediction Center is expecting that these tornadoes today could be significant. So what that means is these could be EF2 or stronger tornadoes, really anywhere, again, in that shaded area, which goes from Fort Myers and then kind of inland up towards the Arcadia area, and then just north of Lake Okeechobee. So it's gonna be a big time threat today. We're obviously gonna have the normal threats with hurricanes as well, which is the wind and the surge and the rainfall. But do not sleep on this tornado threat. If you're in the state of Florida still, specifically the I-4 corridor southbound, you have to have a way to get those watches and warnings today because that tornado threat is serious. And that won't be the end of it. We'll do it again tomorrow. Luckily, tomorrow, a much lower threat. Again, at that point, the storm will be pulling away and will be kind of on that less favorable side of the storm for tornadoes. But still an area nonetheless there on the East Coast from Daytona Beach southward to Miami-Dade, and then even back into the Lake Okeechobee and Everglades area there. All right, let's go through some model guidance, and I got skipped way ahead here, but we'll go ahead and start here. So I'm going to start by showing a hurricane model so we can really dive into the direct impacts on a local scale, and then we will zoom out and look at the state as a whole, and then kind of break down those impacts for you. So this is the latest HWRF model, just ran this morning. In fact, it's still technically running right now. So this is very new and latest and greatest technology, if you will, here. So current structure of the storm, again, we do have a center that is still, well defined. What's going to happen throughout the day today, though, is the storm is going to begin to take a bit of a different look. This is 5 p.m. today. You'll notice the central pressure is at this point probably risen up to the 930s or the 940s millibar wise, which again is still a major Category 4 hurricane, which is what we are expecting at landfall. But notice here, this dry air at this point is finally beginning to do some damage. Some of that wind shear is opening up the backside of the storm, and dry air is beginning to funnel in. So by the time that the storm makes landfall this evening, this is very likely what it will look like. We're going to have kind of two separate modes of bad weather with the storm. We're going to have the northern side. This is where we're going to have the worst of the rain and the wind. This is where winds could be gusting past 100 miles an hour. This is where we will be seeing torrential rainfall rates. And then there's the southern side where you're noticing significantly less precipitation, but this is where the storm surge will be the worst. This is where we're going to get that very strong onshore flow here, potentially from Sarasota down to Venice, and depending on the track of the storm, maybe north of there, but especially Port Charlotte, Fort Myers, Naples, points northbound to the southern tip of Tampa Bay. I can almost guarantee you those regions are going to get big time surge out of this storm. The question mark is Tampa Bay itself. So let me go and back this up a little bit. I just want to kind of show that, but we'll back up some. So this is this afternoon. Again, the storm at this point beginning to make that transition like I just talked about. But look at these feeder bands, again, moving inland. This is going to bring a big-time tornado threat today as this rotates inland, not only in coastal Florida, but even inland, again, I-4 corridor southbound. Now, by the time we get to this evening around sunset, this is when the surge will really begin to pick up here from Fort Myers northward into Tampa Bay. And you'll notice, again, here is that strong onshore flow pointing towards the coastline. Also, the kind of outer eye wall here will begin to scrape the coast. That's going to increase the winds. It's going to increase the surge, as I talked about, and increase those rainfall rates as well. And move this one more ahead in a time. This is 11 p.m. So again, getting near the midnight hour. At this point, it's really going to be getting towards, or not towards the peak of the storm, but this will be the peak through, the hours behind this as well as this eye wall begins to move in. The strongest winds at this point, and then the strongest surge as well as the storm is just offshore moving inland. So again, the track is going to be very important for surge. The latest models, I would say, have a consensus right into the area just south of Tampa Bay. Again, from Sarasota, Bradenton, kind of down towards the Venice area is where a lot of the model guidance brings the center of the storm in the latest runs. So that would help the storm surge in Tampa Bay, but it would not completely eliminate it. You'll notice here, we do still have kind of a flow generally into the bay, and this would still, bring surge to portions of the Tampa Bay area. It's just a matter of where in the Tampa Bay area would we see surge, but the worst of it would be south, again, from Sarasota, Bradenton, and into Venice with a track like this. But I'll remind you, very small switches in where the storm track is going to have big consequences in those impacts. So let's say this shifts north by just 30 miles, then the worst of the surge is right into Tampa Bay, and we have catastrophic impacts with, again, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge with a scenario like that, and that is still in the cone of possibilities. So just note that. All right. This is getting into 2 a.m. about landfall time. Again, major Category 4 or strong Category 3 hurricane making landfall right in or around the Tampa Bay region. To the north, we have, again, that very strong eye wall, winds gusting past 100 miles an hour. We're going to see wind damage. We are going to see power outages. To the south of there, again, less rain. But the storm surge really picks up and is kind of at its peak at this point as the storm moves inland. All right, so we move this further ahead in time. This is about 5 a.m. At this point, the inland impacts really begin to ramp up. This is going to mean Orlando, Ocala, Daytona Beach, areas in and around that part of Florida here going to really get in on some very big time winds. I think inland we could still see winds gusting past 80, 90 miles an hour through the Orlando area, up through Sanford, up into Daytona Beach, even back down into Cape Canaveral. Going to see some really big time winds out of this. Also at this point, the storm surge will be at its worst probably through portions of the west coast of Florida. The east coast rather. From Jacksonville on down, you'll notice, look at all of this. This is strong onshore flow. So no different than the west coast, even though the storm's coming from the other side. You're still going to get storm surge impacts here as the storm works through in the wee morning hours. All right, 8 a.m. Again, the storm speeding up, trying to get out of here, but then that heavy band of rain, again, continuing to work through really just the I-4 corridor in general. The I-4 corridor overnight tonight into tomorrow is really going to be a nightmare to travel in that same section of I-75 that kind of cuts through this portion that I have drawn out on your map. We're going to see a lot of down trees. We're going to see power outages. So if you can avoid traveling at all overnight tonight and into tomorrow, I definitely would. Again, I remember with Helene, we had trees that fell on cars as they were traveling down I-10. So you don't want that to be you with Milton here. All right, good news. By the time we get to late Thursday morning into the afternoon, the storm finally begins to work offshore and things clear out through much of the state of Florida. And really by tomorrow evening, those linemen can really probably start getting to fixing some of the power as the storm pulls away and the winds die down pretty quickly. So that's kind of the zoomed in view. Let's zoom out just a little bit here and look at the state as a whole. This is the high resolution rapid refresh model, and I'm showing this to you not because I want you to look at the intensity. I just want you to look at the overall structure of the storm and the rain and where it's happening. I think it's doing a good job of that, but just ignore the millibars. Go off the millibars we just looked at with the last model. But you can use this for track and just general where is it raining and where do we have a tornado threat, where's the highest winds and things like that. All right, so here we go. Late afternoon, tornado threat in full swing at this point here through, again, the southern half of the state, including the threat of significant tornadoes. That's going to be the big theme today before eventually we get towards sunset. And this is, again, when things go downhill pretty quickly. But I'm going to kind of back this up a little bit. Look at this. Round after round after round of these supercells moving off the Gulf of Mexico and into the state of Florida. So very concerned about that tornado threat today. In fact, we already have had some this morning, at least warnings. And again, that's going to continue throughout the entire day. All right, so here we go. This is about the time the sun is going to start setting here. And you'll notice at this point, again, the storm moving closer to the west coast. And at this point, the storm surge will begin to increase. As we talked about, the winds will begin to increase. And what I want you to notice here also is, again, with this map, where are we seeing the rain? So it's going to be raining really on and off through the entire peninsula, but a very steady, heavy rain to the north here from the northern eye wall kind of inland, where we're getting some of this heavier banding showing up on the future models. Now we go into the overnight. Again, here comes the storm making landfall. Again, ignore the pressures here, ignore the strength, just going off the general idea of what you're seeing. And what you're seeing is, again, the heaviest of the rain here to the north of the storm, while to the south, it's more of a tornado threat. So we are going to see, again, rain to the south of the storm, but it's going to be more isolated. It's going to be more from a cellular nature, just meaning it's going to be on and off. It's going to be bands of rain, and that's where we're going to have the big time tornado threat. But to the north, where it's this more constant rain, that's where we're going to have the flooding threat as, again, it rains all day today, and then the eye wall moves through, just drops torrential amounts of rainfall, again, through the early morning hours along the I-4 corridor, even up from Daytona Beach into Jacksonville, Gainesville, Ocala in on that heavy rain. And then, again, luckily the storm gets on out of here by tomorrow. All right, peak storm surge forecast. Like I said, this is a very difficult forecast. Now, not the numbers per se. We feel confident somebody's going to get 10 to 15 feet of storm surge, but who gets it? That's the real question. Like we talked about, worst case scenario, and it is still a possibility, is the storm just skirts right into Tampa Bay or just north of it. And then that would bring 10 to 15 feet of storm surge into Tampa Bay. Now, if it goes just south of there, kind of into Bradenton and Sarasota, then we would get that 10 to 15 feet of surge into those regions and then down into Venice. And if we get a way further track here just north of Port Charlotte, then the Fort Myers area could get in on those 10 to 15 feet. I think I've been saying inches, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge, which again would just be catastrophic. So somebody's getting catastrophic storm surge. Somebody's going to get absolutely rocked by the Gulf of Mexico. It's a matter of who exactly gets the worst of it between Tampa Bay and Charlotte Harbor. It's going to be somewhere in there. And again, if I had to guess where I think the worst of it will be, I think probably it's going to be that Bradenton, Venice, Sarasota area. I think will probably be the worst of it. Storm surge wise. But again, even outside of that part of Florida, we're going to get storm surge from the Jacksonville area, the St. Johns River, all the way back down towards Cape Canaveral. I mean, 3 to 5 feet of storm surge, that's nothing to write off. That's going to cause problems. In fact, we even have evacuations on the East Coast due to that storm surge. And even you folks up in Charleston, a couple feet of storm surge possible overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning. due to the general track of this storm. So storm surge will continue to be the biggest threat with this system, but it is not the only water threat. We have an excessive risk of flash flooding here today, again, right along the I-4 corridor. So Tampa Bay, Orlando, Ocala, Daytona Beach. This is the highest level they can issue for a flash flooding risk, and that won't be the end of it. We'll do it again tomorrow as the storm is pulling away there along the eastern portions of the I-4 corridor from Orlando up through Daytona Beach and down into Cape Canaveral. So again, a lot of heavy rain, and to take a look at some of those rainfall totals, I wasn't kidding when I said a lot of heavy rain. Tampa potentially could get 15 inches of rain, Orlando a foot of rain, Daytona Beach a foot of rain. But again, a thing to notice here is look at the cutoff. It's going to be very close. A place like Port St. Lucie may only get a couple inches of rain, while 100 miles up I-95 has a foot, maybe a foot and a half of rain. But either way, wherever this band of heaviest rain sets up, which I feel pretty confident is going to be right along the I-4 corridor, is going to have a flash flooding risk. So you need to watch that. It's not just the coast that has a flooding concern. It's well inland here with this freshwater flooding as well. All right, let's talk about winds, because that is another concern here with Milton, and we'll go ahead and move this ahead in a time. Again, this afternoon, things pick up, but still just tropical storm strength. It's really overnight tonight as that eye wall begins to move in right around the midnight hour that these wind gusts begin to pick up into hurricane strength. Sarasota, Tampa gusting again up towards hurricane strength. And that trend continues during the overnight as the storm itself moves in. Again, those west coast from Bradenton down to Venice likely going to be getting wind gusts up near 100 miles an hour. And then as the storm makes landfall, this is when I think Tampa itself and these northern suburbs of Tampa, Tarpon Springs, and kind of surrounding areas, you're going to be in the northern eye wall. You'll probably clock in the strongest winds of anybody with this storm system. Again, even to the north, if you're not getting the worst of the surge, you're going to get the worst of the wind damage. So, if winds are gusting at 110, 120, maybe even 130 miles an hour, that is going to cause, again, big problems on the I-4 corridor from St. Pete up through Clearwater, Tarpon Springs, Tampa, those northern suburbs into Lakeland overnight tonight. And again, eventually, as the storm moves inland over towards the Orlando area, look at these wind gusts. By the time the sun is rising, still gusting up near 80 miles an hour from Orlando up towards Ocala. Tropical storm force wind gusts from Gainesville to Jacksonville. And same story kind of to the south of the storm from Cape Coral, Fort Myers, down towards Port St. Lucie. And then even into West Palm Beach, getting in on some of those tropical storm conditions. And that swath of the heaviest wind continues to work through the I-4 corridor tomorrow morning. And luckily, again, the worst of it into Daytona Beach by the afternoon. But then by tomorrow evening, as the sun begins to go down, again, the winds calm down. And we can start that cleanup process. And then by the time we get to Friday, all good here. All the winds are basically died down. All right, we kind of already looked at this, but I just want to show you, for you folks in Georgia and South Carolina, very briefly going to show this. Not really your problem. Again, we could get some rain into extreme southeastern Georgia and into extreme southern South Carolina with this. But overall speaking, again, note that really all the rain, all the severe weather, and most of the winds even will be to your south into the state of Florida, even if, again, we are going to get some of that strong onshore flow. So definitely gusty winds on the beaches themselves with that storm surge, but more of a Florida problem than anything. All right, folks, so that's all I had for Milton. Let's go ahead and dive into kind of what's going on through the rest of the country. And again, what I'm looking at could be a big-time major cold front about a week or so from now. So current satellite loop, we have this big ridging out west, so it's been quite warm out into that region. But on the other side of that, we have this trough and some low pressure here over the northeast. And this is bringing some cloud cover and disturbed weather down out of Canada, kind of into portions of the northeast. So we could see some showers this afternoon. And some kind of cloudy weather, but everywhere between that and Milton, here through the east central part of the country, really dealing with just some beautiful weather, about as good as you could ask for. Current precipitation, again, we talked about Florida already, so we'll kind of move on from that. But the northeast, even up into portions of Canada here, we've got a pretty rainy Wednesday so far. And again, just all due to this disturbance or this big spin of low pressure that is just kind of wrapping a lot of this moisture into the region and just kind of bringing very dreary fall-like weather, which some of you might enjoy given how hot it has been as of late. And again, the start of fall, it's always a lot nicer to have those dreary days than maybe once you're deep into it. Although I guess we are kind of deep into fall at this point, but you get the point. That's the forecast. Out west, we do have a disturbance moving through the Pacific Northwest. It could bring some showers today through Washington and portions of British Columbia and Saskatchewan. But overall, again, not really a strong storm or anything to talk about in that department. For watches, warnings, and advisories, really not a whole lot going on out there. All right, radar today. Again, the big story is the Northeast. We talked about Florida, so I'm going to kind of ignore that because we talked 20 minutes about it. So I think you get the point down there. But in the Northeast, again, these rounds of showers could even be what's the word? Pumped up, I guess, or there's a better word than that. But it could be increased, we'll say, by some lake effect influence as well as it moves over these Great Lakes. So definitely noticing that with that increased rainfall moving through upstate New York into the Finger Lakes and into the Catskills even by the time we get into this evening. But overall, again, just light, kind of dreary weather. Now, right as this comes off the lakes, this could be convective in nature, so don't rule out a little bit of graupel or small hail here into extreme upstate New York, kind of really close to the lakes as the storms tap into some of that fuel and that instability as they move over. So watching for that. But by the time we get to tonight, dies down a little bit. And then we'll wake up tomorrow and get kind of another quick round of some of those showers, but this time probably more into Maine than anywhere else. And you'll notice outside of that, I mean, it's still just beautiful fall-like weather. So really couldn't ask for much better. All right, what's coming on down the pipeline here? Well, I am looking at the potential for another big-time shot of cold air. This is our current shot of cold air. It's all this blue up into the Northeast. And again, even brought to more back to average weather, we'll say through the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. But we could get well below average temperatures about a week from now. So you'll notice here we go. This is this weekend. Ridging tries to build back in for most of us, so we start to warm up a little bit more. You'll notice there's one shot of cold air that quickly slings down out of Canada into Maine, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick this weekend. But here comes the bigger shot of cold air. I mean, look at this. This is a huge trough that kind of dips on down here, very positively tilted initially, but eventually swings around. And by the time we get to the middle of next work week, I mean, look at this. This is as good as it gets if you're a fall fan and even a winter fan, potentially, into the East Coast. We've just got this big elongated trough with well below average heights extending all the way down into the Southeast. This is going to be, I would say, the first cold shot of the year. We've had cool shots this year, but this will likely be the first cold shot of the year getting into next Tuesday and then even into next Wednesday. And this potentially could bring the first snow of the year to some folks. So let's talk about that very briefly here for a second. And you'll notice that kind of, again, quiet. We get a little bit of shot of precipitation this weekend through Maine. But then the big show arrives later on, and look at this low pressure developing, and we've got what is really almost a full-out winter storm here near the Canada-U.S. border, even bringing some snow into the United States through the Northeast. So it's something we're going to want to watch, and we'll continue to watch. But behind it, lake effect snow looks to be in store. The first big lake effect snow of the year through New York, Pennsylvania. And those regions, again, about a week from now, even a little less than that. And then look at this through the Southeast. That 540 line, or kind of where the column from the surface of 500 millibars is at or below freezing. Look at that, a little piece of it breaking off all the way down into the Carolinas. We're going to have very cool mornings. I mean, it's going to be pants and jacket mornings next week as that swings on through. And you'll notice even maybe some more low pressure trying to develop along that trough. Maybe, we'll see. So again, it looks like we're really deep into fall now, and we could see our first snowstorm of the year, which I'm super excited to talk about in about a week. And we'll dive more into that really starting Friday, but even probably a bit more tomorrow once we are done with Milton. All right, folks, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Again, if you did, please subscribe, like it, and comment. Let me know where you're watching from, and consider sharing with somebody that you think might find it useful. With that said, have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all tomorrow.